Welcome to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist and performance coach. And here on the show, I'm going to challenge you to think deeper, commit to greatness, and develop a stronger mindset. You'll hear stories from those who are living life on their terms, and you'll receive strategies that will help you level up. So the question is, are you ready to be your own 1%? Let's get started. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Be That 1% podcast. I'm your host, James Silvis, mindset specialist, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the show. And if you are a return listener, thank you for being a part of this community. Thank you for being the type of individual who is constantly putting good information in their mind, surrounding themselves with concepts, ideas, people who are on the path, who are doing the work, who are not sitting in the bleachers, but are in the arena, putting themselves out there, continuously refining who they are, what they do, and showing up to life with a zest of wanting to squeeze as much as you can out of this life experience, right? Time is short. We don't know when our last day is going to be. And so, how can we continue to be where our feet are and really appreciate life for what it is, even when it's not dealing us the things that we think we want, right? Learning and understanding and choosing to believe that life is happening for us and not to us. My wife and I, this past weekend, went to church, and, I'm not a consistent churchgoer, but the older I've gotten, the more I like being around environments where prayer is, or a version of prayer, where people are in their hearts, where they're on purpose, where they're in service, and church can be a good atmosphere for that. And so we're sitting there, and there is a quote that I heard about, a couple years ago, and it was this idea that everyone drifts, but few shift. And the pastor was talking about him being on vacation and going out into the ocean and sitting on a floaty, and before he realized, he was drifting away from the shore, and had to consistently bring himself back. And then, as he was sharing this, I started thinking about how I've thought about this over the years, and that, drifting is just a part of life. Life is constant movement. If you think about it as an ocean, there's constant waves. And depending on the current, depending on the winds, depending on the community, the culture, the media, the environments that we're in, we're being pulled in directions. We're being pushed into certain spaces. And drifting requires no effort. It's something that just happens. But few shift back or shift to their truth or something that they want. If we're constantly drifting, then we're basically a tumbleweed blowing in the wind. But when we shift, there's intentional thought, intentional movement in a specific direction, right? And in order to shift back to something or shift from something, we have to know what's right for us. What's our truth? What's the thing that we're deciding to anchor ourselves to, so that when drifting happens, we can recognize it. We know how to get back into our center, get back to our center, right? And it's you got to know your destination. If I'm trying to get from LA to New York, right, and I'm on a plane, but I'm 1 degree off, over the course of that flight, I'm not landing in New York anymore. I'm landing in Maine. I'm landing in 3 states away. And that doesn't happen overnight. The thing about drifting is you don't really realize that you're drifting until maybe it's too late. And so the beauty about understanding what you stand for, what you want, who you are, what you want your life to be about, and the continuous commitment to that daily, through, a morning ritual, or through the types of relationships that you have, or through, a vision board, or some picture that reminds you of your purpose, or reframes your life in a specific way. Those are ways to shift back so that we don't drift, right? And our thoughts, our brains are fascinating muscles. They're beautiful machinery. And, research shares with us that there's roughly, probably more for some, 60,000 thoughts a day. And we can measure a thought by an electrical impulse through an electrode that gets put on your head, your scalp. And as your thoughts are happening, there's these electrical impulses. But the thing about these thoughts is that they're not yours. They're not yours. If they were, then how could you, if you were to close your eyes, observe those thoughts? Who's the person observing what you're thinking? Right? What I've come to realize is that we're the selector and the introducer of our thoughts. That yes, we've grown up in our environments. By the age of 7, our minds, our brains are usually pretty solidified with our personalities, and our personalities, according to Joe Dispenza, dictate our personal realities. Right? So that's pretty set there, but it can change. Our brains are malleable. They're clay-like. There's neuroplasticity. It's constantly evolving and growing if we allow it to, if we're putting ourselves in challenging situations, if we're continuously, being a student to life. But if our traumas or our fears continue to run narratives, stories that aren't ours, but we believe them to be, then we're going to find things that reinforce who we believe ourselves to be, what we think is possible for us and our lives. If we've been through a really hard situation, an emotional situation that caused lots of pain, lots of heartache, and we have not dealt with that, we have not healed that, we have not looked at that, then there is a story, there is a belief system that's active there. And that belief system will run our attention. So we enter a space, a room, a relationship. We're going to look for the things that we believe to be true. Our brains want us to be right. So we got to find the evidence to back it up. So if I believe that I should not be in a particular environment, I should not have the promotion that I just got, I should not be in a relationship with this amazing person because I'm unworthy, what do you think we're going to find in our environments? Proof of that. Even though it's not true. Even though that person may not be thinking the thing that we think they're thinking, we'll assume that they are. And then we'll create stories that aren't there and believe those stories. Our whole reality is based on a story, and that story told over time equals a belief, and that belief creates certainty, which allows us to operate with certainty in uncertain situations, which is mostly life. Like, you can't predict anything, so therefore every moment that we're entering can in some way be uncertainty. And that's a lot of uncertainty to deal with. So we got to create some certainty so that we're not constantly just being like, what is life? What is life? What is life? We got to be able to operate, right? But that's where belief systems come in. But the challenge is that certain belief systems don't serve us anymore. They did at one time. They served us for protection. They served us for, keeping us alive. They served for getting out of a specific situation. But that may have been 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Yet we're still stuck in that same belief system, therefore experiencing the same things over and over and over. And this drifting can happen based on a lot of these belief systems. We can drift further from what our actual truth is. If we were to sit down and actually define who we believe ourselves to be, maybe we don't even, it's something that can't even be defined. Maybe who we are is really just the awareness that comes before the thought. And if we're the awareness before the thought, because we can observe our thoughts, then we get to be who we choose to be right now in this moment, even though we have not been that in any other moment prior to this. If we have the thought that it can be possible, and we hold that thought, and we water that thought, and we act from that thought, then we have one moment of evidence that we can be that. I'm a generous person. I'm a consistent person. I operate with love. Doesn't matter how I started, it's how I finish. I may not have this idea yet. I may not have developed the skill yet, but I'm working towards it. Those statements attached to actions coming from those thoughts that you've introduced, that you've continuously selected and chosen time and moment and moment and moment again, can build a new identity. And with that new identity comes a new set of belief systems, a new set of things to pay attention to wherever you go. And now, rather than where you saw lack, where you saw you were less than, you begin to see things that you have. You begin to develop an abundance mindset. I am healthy. I have this opportunity. I get to be in this room. There are other places I could have been, but I'm here, right? Then the narrative shifts. And as the meaning and the context around what you're experiencing shifts, so does what you feel. You begin to hardwire your nervous system to operate differently than what it used to be. And this is how people can rise in social classes. This is how, people who were written off at one point become, top in their company. People who, have experienced a lot of pain and vowed to not be in that situation before have changed and stayed changed, right? We can adapt. We're moldable. Human beings are the most resourceful, a very resourceful species. We adapt. And we don't have to just adapt out of survival. We can adapt out of choice too. And that's the idea of you can survive or you can thrive, right? That comes from a choice. And yes, it may take time, but you gotta garden the mind, right? You gotta prune daily. You gotta input daily and not allow media or culture or unintentional things that have just always been a part of your life to continue to cause that drifting to happen without you realizing it. And that's where the question of what do you want? What do you stand for? What are your values? Those things anchor you back in. Those are choices. And every moment you got a choice. Sometimes we feel like we don't, or sometimes when we do choose, we feel like it doesn't really matter. But that stacked over time creates a compound effect that leads to a completely different lifestyle and a completely different identity. Everyone drifts, few shift. If you're listening to this podcast, you're not just someone who runs through life on autopilot. You're constantly looking for the nuances, the subtleties, the things that can help improve the quality of your life in whatever aspect you're wanting to focus on. That's beautiful. That's an intentional life. That's living life on your terms, not dictated by what other people think or on other people's terms. Right? You've been given a life. What are you going to do with it? Yeah, you may have not started far ahead compared to other people. And the story's not over. Yeah, there may have been a lot of unfair situations take place in your situation in your life. True. And what are we going to do about it? These are the conversations I have in my mind all the time. And it's situations like, being in church the other day that remind me if I, and that's why reflection is so important. It's so hard to reflect. It can be so hard to reflect nowadays because there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of noise, a lot of people who are anxious and irritated, and there's a fractured kind of buzz and electricity in the air from people just kind of going through the motions. Go. How much can I get? And there's not much stillness. There's not much presence. There's not much time to connect dots and to learn. And that's why taking the time to reflect, to journal, to think about who you're being, what you want to be, where the gaps are, who's in your life, what's important. Those questions are the anchors. And when life deals you challenges, when you're drifting, it's those things that pull you back, right? So this is a reminder to you, to me, to everyone listening, that you're going to drift. It happens. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to fall down. We're going to mess up. We're going to not look our best. We're going to, all the things. And what do we do when those things happen? And the more we course correct, I forget who said this, but recently it was like, they were talking about mindfulness. And when an individual finds or has the awareness that they're catching themselves in a negative self-talk pattern, and like, oh, this is a moment where I'm not talking to myself the way I want to, right? Oh, let me change that language. That moment right there, that catching of you talking to yourself that way, in this example, that's the rep. The rep is not you speaking to yourself positively. It's you catching yourself and making the adjustment. That, right? The catching of it, the observing of it, that's the rep. And the more awareness you can have, at least initially, as you build new habits of thinking, that's what makes those shifts possible and long-lasting. So now, rather than having a rudderless boat that you have to row, you get a motor. And you turn that motor on, and now you have purpose. You have directionality. You have vision. You have people in your corner that are fanning your flames. And all that is the gas to the motor. So now you can go further. You can last longer. You can take on bigger waves. All right? But most of us don't create that engine. We just think that we have to row everywhere, or better yet, paddle. And that's not the case, right? So shift back to your truth. Shift back to what matters. Shift back to whatever the 1% lifestyle is for you. Being your own 1%. That's living life on your terms. So I'm grateful for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing the work. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone that you feel needs to hear it. And as always, I'm open to bringing in content that you guys want to hear. So shoot me a DM, an email, whatever aligns best. And if you haven't done so already, head over to the iTunes. Would love a review from you. Please share this mission. Continue to expand these messages. So much love. Till next time, be your own 1%.